And we are very lucky today. Okay. Very lucky today to have with us Kip Studer, who is the Nutrient Management Specialist in the Western Lake Erie Basin for the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the Division of Soil and Water Conservation. He is well equipped for that job. He's a graduate of Wayne State University and holds a master's degree in crop science from the University of Illinois. Kip has worked with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Forestry, several local soil and water conservation districts, and the IPM Institute of North America. He is a certified crop advisor and certified conservation planner. He is currently serving on the Ohio Certified Crop Advisor Board and for our Nutrient Stewardship Council. Kip is currently focusing on nutrient management planning for the H2O Ohio Program and has been a part of several nutrient reduction programs in the Western Lake Erie Basin in the past. And we know that these are the important things to consider when we're talking about pollution in the lake from nutrients. So without any further ado, we'll have Kip take over the lecture, and then we'll be able to ask questions after he finishes.
Well, thank you, Ann and Darcy. Appreciate the opportunity to go ahead and talk about this and the invitation to discuss nutrient management and what we're doing to protect Lake Erie. I will go ahead and share my screen and turn my video on so everyone can see me. Get the right one. Okay, well, so as I stated, I'm with the Ohio Department of Agriculture. I've been there about 10 years. I've worked across Northwest Ohio. I started off in Defiance County for local stormwater. I worked in Henry County. I interned at Wood County. I live in Lucas County and grew up in Fulton County. So I've got pretty much all of Northwest Ohio covered when we look at what farmers are doing. I've always been very interested in agriculture, but didn't have the opportunity to farm growing up. So my mom's side of the family were farmers. So I did the next best thing. You marry into a farm family. And so I married my wife, and she's from a farm family down in Putnam County. So they let me pretend to be farmers. I get to drive a combine, drive a tractor once in a while. So I get to do the fun things, but don't have to any real responsibilities. I don't have to break it when I fix it when I break it, and I just go home and take my boys home. So I have 3 boys. They love doing that. So I get to be around agriculture that way and experience some of that side of agriculture. So just wanted to provide a quick overview of the Ohio Department of Ag. We're a relatively small division when you look at state government. We have about 450 employees, and we've got a lot of different divisions or divisions within the department that we cover. Our animal health focuses on maintaining animal health in Ohio with avian flu and other things affecting some of our poultry facilities. We have a lot on the plate there. Food safety, meat inspection, dairy, those all protect your food sources. So whether it's milk, those programs are all there to protect it. The amusement ride safety, that's an interesting one. You know, you don't really think about the fair. They are regulated. Cedar Point is regulated by the Ohio Department of Ag. And so that's one of those aspects that no one really thinks about. Our livestock environmental permitting, they're a small division. They manage the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations. So they're a slightly different division. They have some of the same roles and are responsible for some of those similar things that we work on. I'll kind of get into what we specifically at Soil and Water do. Another interesting one is the weights and measures. You know, they work with the auditors on the scales, whether it's in a grocery store or the scales that weigh the trucks going down the roads. We're responsible for that. And it's some of those aspects that a lot of people don't think about when they think about agriculture. Yeah, so the auditors are responsible for gas stations specifically, but they might work with ODA on their measurements or working through that certification process. It's a very interesting, they've got their own building and they have all these little weights. We toured it once. It was pretty neat. They have all these little weights and measurement tools, and they work specifically on doing that. And, you know, it's very something you don't think about every day that affects you, because it's you buy and sell goods based on quantities. And so it's a very interesting aspect. Like I said, fairs were responsible for them. There's, I think, just over 90. So there's more than almost every county has a fair, but there are some independent fairs also that still fall under there. And then the Ohio Grape Industries, our market program, that's kind of the Ohio Proud, and there's some different marketing programs that we have out there through the state of Ohio. Ohio Proud is one of them that you probably see on some of the goods when you go through the grocery stores. So my division, the Division of Soil and Water, we have about 35 employees, and we're responsible for delivering this program, our program, out to 88 counties. And so all 88 counties have a soil and water conservation district. That's an entity of government funded through the county. The county pays dollars, and then through general revenue money and tipping fees and different taxes, we pay match funding to them. And so that money is distributed through. So if Lucas County gives $100,000, we may give them $85,000. We try to get to a 1-to-1 match for dollars. And so typically we're in the 80 to 90, depending on our budget. But for every dollar the county commissioners give in all 88 counties, we try to match it 1-to-1. So we being the division, we're responsible. The question was, who is we? We, ODA, distributes that money out annually based on their budgets and what the soil and water districts bring in through county dollars. And so whether it's county general fund or they worked with the townships and they secured additional funding, it all can go in and be matched. And so a lot of soil and water districts have had some opportunity where they have found different sources of money and resources to get there. So yeah. So that's one of the other things is technical assistance with those programs goes along with it. So different employees have different technical responsibilities and offer different technical assistance based on what. So we have engineers, we have soils people, and they all kind of cover their little topics. And so conservation engineering assistance is one we work where we work directly with farmers and landowners to deliver conservation assistance. Soil and water, we are required to do a soils inventory. That's managed annually through updating soils and different aspects of soils there within each county. We're responsible for that. Our watershed management program, the state's broken, you know, no matter where you're at, your water goes somewhere, right? So here, we know it goes to Lake Erie, but you don't have to go very far south, and it's going down to the Ohio River. So we work with those programs and our partners over at Ohio EPA to deliver different watershed grants and that management side of it. And then specifically where I worked the most is cost share programs. So we work specifically with farmers or with landowners to deliver conservation practices. So there in 2016, when I started, we were with the Division of Natural Resources. We moved over to the Department of Agriculture. The Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting, they were responsible for manure, and they thought it would be a good opportunity to be co-partners basically over there in one division. The additional thing is Department of Natural Resources does not do regulation. The Department of Ag is almost largely regulated. So they can deliver regulation a little more effectively than what the Department of Natural Resources did. So it's been a great opportunity for us to go over there and work with the Department of Ag. So as I said, all 88 counties have soil and water districts. Update here, I guess. And so each of those soil and water conservation districts are their own entity. They have their own 5 board members, and they determine how to work within that county, what priorities are, and work with the districts to deliver the program. So sometimes we have programs for them to deliver, and other times they're out searching out their own grants and working on their own projects. And so,
Do they have regular meetings?
so the question was, do they have regular meetings? And yes, they have monthly meetings. It's just as any of their elected officials. I mean, they
Open to the public?
they are open to the public. They're required to do all the notices. And so you can go attend their meetings. Lucas Soil and Water here just moved. They're right beside Lot Industries there. What's the road? Can't think of it. Hill. Yeah, they're right beside Lot Industries there. They just moved up to that new office. And so you can go to their meetings. Sometimes they have to give notice just like anything else, but sometimes they move it around and go to different places. But yes, they do have monthly meetings. So one of the other we cover a large array of different programs at the local level. You know, we have 5 or 6 major metropolitan areas, so they deliver a lot of the urban programs. So what Lucas Soil and Water does and what Fulton Soil and Water does, our neighbor to the west, quite differently. You know, their demographics are quite different. The programs they need to offer quite different. And so we see that in what all those counties deliver. So, I mean, some staffs, we have 2 people in a county. Other staffs, I think Franklin County has probably north of 20 employees. And so we have a big variation of the amount of employees and what the services they offer in each county. So one of the things I always enjoy working at a local soil and water is the partnerships. I mean, we have local soil and water district folks. We have potentially division employees working out of offices. And then we also have our federal partners who are the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And so typically most offices, if they're co-located, have 1 or 2 employees there who can offer federal technical assistance dollars out to landowners for doing conservation practices and some of those different aspects of those federal programs. And so they are, a lot of them are co-located. It's becoming less and less, but it is traditionally how soil and water districts have worked. So ag pollution abatement program, our division has been responsible for the ag pollution abatement program. I think it was the late 70s or early 80s, and that is a statewide program to minimize agricultural runoff, whether it's from silviculture, forestry, manure, or erosion. So if soil is entering the stream in such a bad situation, we can actually find the person for not protecting the soil. And so that program has been around for quite some time, and that's one of the responsibilities that our staff does manage. We also manage the Western Lake Erie Basin Manure Application Program. We refer to it as Senate Bill 1. We all know Senate Bill 1 changes every year, but we still call it Senate Bill 1. And in 2016, that's when that program was starting to get implemented. And so that is the restriction of manure and fertilizer on frozen and snow covered ground, or also if there's a predicted rain, a significant rain. So manure is a ½ inch of rain, I think, in 48 hours, and fertilizer is an inch of rain in, probably saying it backwards, but basically if the forecast says it's going to rain, you're not supposed to go out there and put manure out there or fertilizer, because it increases the risk of running off. And so that's a specific rule, and we can go out and find producers if people complain and turn them in saying, hey, we saw so and so doing that. The question was how many times does it happen? Less and less. You know, we did have more starting off there in 2016, probably a couple dozen, but it was an education process. There was fines that went out. We continue to have less and less because it's becoming less of a common practice. Correct. And so we have seen less and less specific Senate Bill 1 rules. I don't have any numbers off the top of my head. I'd have to get some better answers for you, but overall, we have seen less of that because it's an education process. That was a good opportunity. We're not doing anything else in the winter. Let's go spread the manure and clean the barn out. We know better now. So the final thing along that ag pollution abatement was the Grand Lake St. Mary's rule. Grand Lake St. Mary's has a very high density of agriculture or livestock agriculture, and it's very close vicinity of Grand Lake St. Mary's, and so that the livestock distribution of manure is much higher in that watershed. Probably some of the highest in the country. I mean, there's just a lot of animals in a very small watershed. I don't know the exact Okay, we got a question. So the question was, is it commercialized? So yes, farmers apply it to their own property or farm it to a neighbor's. But if you're meaning commercialized, like the water separated and sold as fertilizer or compost, there are some so the folks in Mercer County, they have I think it's called the Ag Solutions, and it is a specific program to make ag more sustainable in Mercer County. And so they're primarily focusing on, okay, we recognize we have an issue with nutrient loading. Let's look at byproducts or other ways we can distribute these nutrients elsewhere or be more sustainable within the watershed also. So who does the actual work? So most of the time it comes back to the farmers, or we may look at innovation technology grants. I sit on a technology assessment program. And so we are looking at different ways of taking manure and making it into another byproduct. So we can either ship it further or move it to further away. Manure is very expensive to apply. I mean, there's dollars, you know, fuel costs, implement costs, and so it is important that it moves further away so we don't build it up in one spot. So
I have a question about
Mhm.
If that high amount of manure product, is it chemicals?
So I don't know the specific, the question was, is it just CAPOs? I don't know the specific numbers on it. Here we have 141 livestock operations that require a manure management plan. So all those farms have a manure management plan. We have 3 levels of CAFOs in the state of Ohio. So large, then small and medium. Our division is responsible for small and medium, and then large fall under Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting. I don't know the specific breakdown for Grand Lake St. Mary's, but if you have, there's a tonnage or an amount of gallons that they, at a certain point, say, okay, the 2 beef steers you have for your fair project, we don't require a manure management plan for them. If they had 10 there and maybe a dozen hogs, they may have a nutrient management plan. And so it depends on the quantity of manure that they produce. And so they did an inventory there in Grand Lake St. Mary's and said basically who needs one, who doesn't need one, but we've got nutrients that we need to take care of, and basically did an assessment.
Question.
Mhm.
Does your department do an annual assessment of these farms, or do you wait for somebody to complain that something's going on?
So We are specifically complaint driven, except for in Grand Lake St.
You're
Mary's.
telling the
Oh, the question is, are we complaint driven, or do we do an annual assessment? We do not do an annual assessment. We have numbers. We use the ag census for our best numbers. We've been working with Ohio State University and some of the other groups to get a better assessment on the amount of animals out there and a better inventory. The ag census is updated every 5 years. The environmental working group just put out a document, and their numbers were exactly the same as ours, saying there's about 23% of the nutrients within the Western Basin come from manure. So I'll jump to, I think, next slide, but I'll talk about it a little more. But we don't do an annual inventory on every single farm, but we have an idea at the county level on how much manure is being created annually. And so we've had a lot of data go into that. Our folks over at EPA, the nutrient mass balance, the TMDL, all looks at the amount of nutrients and where it's coming from to determine the sources. And so that TMDL process, that total maximum daily load that EPA is working on right now, they just finished up drafts. They are working on that. And so they've confirmed the numbers that we've come up with. Ag Census comes up with. So we have a pretty accurate idea on where the manure comes from and how much there is out there. So one, we're talking about the Ohio's phosphorus reduction goals. This is specifically Maumee. We're looking at a 40% phosphorus reduction within the Western Lake Erie Basin. That's about 2.5 million pounds annually of phosphorus. And then our division, when you start breaking it down, EPA is responsible for some. Our division and our non-point source agricultural load is about 800,000 pounds of phosphorus. That's what we're trying to address, and that's our goal of reducing that much phosphorus from the Maumee Basin. So how are we specifically addressing it? In 2019, November 2019, Governor DeWine was up here and he released his H2O Ohio initiative. And that's a statewide program to deliver cost share dollars to agricultural producers for implementing science-based conservation practices. Ohio EPA is also working with their constituents, municipalities, and different entities to deliver programs for them. Our partners over at Ohio Department of Natural Resources are working on wetlands and some other projects to put some buffers in and different projects to have additional wetlands go out there to filter water. Specifically, our program, we're looking at 10 practices. Specifically, nutrient management plans are the main one for us, but we also have additional ones, cover crops and manure incorporation and subsurface phosphorus placement, and we're putting those practices out on there. When this program rolled out, we had great interest from the beginning, and we've continued to have really good interest in developing these best management practices out there in the watershed. You can see some better. So the percentages on the screen are the percentage of acres, cropland acres within that county that are covered by a nutrient management plan. So you can see some of them counties, over 50% of the acres are covered by nutrient management plans. And so I'll dive into nutrient management plans here in a slide or two. But it has been a great response from our agricultural producers, recognizing that there's an issue and trying to address it. So here are just some numbers on H2O Ohio originally. So I don't know if I had a breakdown, but basically everything west of I-75 would have been our initial Maumee watershed. All that water goes through the Maumee. In 2020, we rolled that program out. That was 14 counties. And in July of 2021, we went an additional 10 counties there further to the east. And so we rolled the same H2O Ohio practices out there. And so on the left, we have the Maumee watershed program and then the expansion. So in our initial enrollment, we had about 92 or 920,000 acres that we were enrolled. And we're implementing just about 900,000. We're still cleaning up some of the data from 2021. So we have seen a slight increase, but we're going to just under 900,000 acres. The nutrient management plans we are implementing, and we're reviewing their records to verify they are following a nutrient management plan and putting on nutrients at or below tri-state recommendations. This is about 1,600 producers in that area. We have another about 800 producers in the additional 10 counties, and that's just over 600,000 acres. And the fall of 2023 was the first time we were implementing those contracts in those new 10 counties. So with the budget that is being proposed right now in the legislature, we're looking at maintaining those acres and maybe even adding some. And so we're looking at the funding, and it looks very positive right now. We have a lot of support from the legislature on H2O Ohio. And so we're looking at growing beyond the 1.5 we have and adding some additional acres. We'd really like to get in that 40 or even 50% of the acres covered in nutrient management plan in H2O Ohio. And then eventually we plan to go outside. So we look to get 500,000 acres elsewhere in Ohio as soon as the end of this year. That's the current plan, is to start looking outside. And so the current budget as proposed is looking at about $10 million to go outside of the basin and maintain, with a little bit of expansion, at about $60 million annually here within the Western Basin in those 24 counties. So up here on the slide, I'll quickly just go through them. But when we roll these practices out, we had the 7 listed there on the left. So it's voluntary nutrient management plan development and implementation. So they have a nutrient management plan, they're following it. Variable rate phosphorus application, that's using spatial technology to apply fertilizer where it doesn't. So as the machine goes across the field, it turns on fertilizer, then turns it off. And so they use that technology to put it where it's needed and not where it isn't. Subsurface placement. One of the biggest things we can do from a nutrient reduction standpoint and an environmental risk is to put the phosphorus in the soil. It can bind with some of the soil, and those roots can pull it off that soil particle. And so subsurface placement is really important for getting the nutrients below the surface.
And you do that by cover crop?
So subsurface placement is using an implement to put it actually beneath the ground. And so they can either do that with the planter when they plant the seed, or there's tools called strip till. And so they only till about 8 inches of soil. And so they plant the seed right where they put the nutrients. And so strip till is something that a technology that is used out there. The next one is manure incorporation. Instead of spreading that manure on top, we're injecting it where the roots are, so those roots can take up those nutrients. One way we did that with manure incorporation was a small grains program. That's putting wheat or rye or a summer grass back in that is harvested in the summer to open up a bigger window to put manure on. At times when we get less rain, July, August, we don't get as much rain. Our environmental risk from manure application is less at those times. And so we required them to incorporate it and put it beneath the surface at rates that are equal to or less what Ohio State says we need to grow a crop. And so that small grains program is just trying to add diversity to our agricultural crops out there. Forages is hay. So when we take hay off, we take a lot more nutrients. We're taking the stalk of the plant, we're taking everything basically off, so we can harvest more nutrients. And so we really can draw down the amount of phosphorus out there when we use forages. So pay for that. And the final one is the cover crops. And so overwintering cover crops we have producers out there using 20 weight mixes. So they use 20 different species when they plant a cover crop, but we also have producers that plant one species. And so they can use different rye or grasses that overwinter, so they green back up. And so they plant them in the fall, and then they die shortly, and then they green back up just like your lawn does. And so the overwintering cover requires that 50% of those species go come out of dormancy in the spring and start taking the nutrients up again. And so last summer, we started evaluating these practices and says, how can we maintain accountability and the science-based aspect of these and make this program a little more easier? No, it was a new program. We developed it in about 2.5 months, and we rolled it out, and then COVID hit. So we kind of went with it. Once COVID hit and we all were used to Zoom meetings, we kind of rolled with it. And then here we had an opportunity to say, okay, what could we do better? What opportunities can we bunch some practices? And so what you have up there on the screen is what we plan on doing. You know, small grains and cover crops that are all trying to accomplish it. Let's protect the soil over the winter and use those crops, take up some additional nutrients. And then that variable rate, like I said, we're turning that fertilizer spreader on and off as we go across the field. We're basically going to roll that into just the nutrient management plan. Are you following what that nutrient management plan says? So a nutrient management plan, basically what that is say establishing a budget for those producers based on soil testing. So farmers go out, soil test, and they get a report back saying, do I need fertilizer or don't I? And so we build a plan for them, customized by field level. Some farmers break it down to 2.5 acre grids. So a football field's roughly an acre. So it'd be about 2.5 football fields, and they break their 100 acre field or their 40 acre field down into 2.5 football fields and say, okay, I'm going to soil test at that level and say, do I need fertilizer on that acre, or do I need manure on that acre? And so that is really where the education process comes in with those nutrient management plans. And so we're going out and breaking fields down and looking at them. Do they need nutrients based on the crops you're removing? I have it up there. The cheap farmers may see a benefit. We have some farmers, I only apply 50 pounds. Well, their nutrient management plan says you should have been applying 150 pounds of nitrogen. And so we do have some situations where, they were trying to be as economical as possible. They weren't making money by buying fertilizer, so they were being cheap. And we may make a recommendation that they can apply more fertilizer. They're probably not gonna. They're gonna keep doing what they were doing. And so we try to utilize nutrients where they can be benefited for that individual farm. The other thing we're going against is generational farming, because grandpa did it and dad did it, I'm going to do it that way. And so we're fighting that challenge. And, sometimes we get the buy-in from a younger generation, but, grandpa still may make the decision on those acres. So it is a challenge, but it's an education process. I put up a tractor from 1930s on there and a brand new combine from last year. We aren't talking about the same thing from what grandpa did to what currently is being done out there. The amount of technology in that combine, it can drive itself, it can tell us how many bushels it's taken off, and it gives us so much information about that farm. And we can take that and write a nutrient management plan that's consistent with that. And so, we're not just taking that corn off there, putting it in a silo and feeding it to beef cattle there on the farm. A lot of this corn gets shipped elsewhere. And so it's a big technological advance, and we like the opportunities that technology has given us. So when we look at the Western Lake Erie Basin and from a large scale, and that's how a lot of times we have to look at this, what are we doing out there on a large scale, at a watershed scale? And so we need phosphorus to grow, whether that corn crop or a wheat crop, it needs a certain amount of phosphorus per acre to grow it. It's an essential nutrient. You need phosphorus, I need phosphorus. It's one of those essential nutrients. And so we need it out there. So I talked about the TMDL and the mass balance. They've determined that roughly 20 to 25% of phosphorus is made up from manure. So it may not not every acre is going to get manure, but 20 to 25% year in and year out is getting manure. And those producers look at a nutrient management plan and they say, okay, this field needs it, that field needs it. We're also putting cost share dollars out there to move it to a neighbor or a field that may need more of it or hasn't ever seen manure. There are significant benefits to manure. You know, we hear organic farming. They can all, I mean, large majority of them can only use manure. And so, you know, we know there's benefits to organic farming, and that's the way. So that's it, pretty much one of the only nutrients that they can use is manure or compost. So year in and year out, yes, farmers are aware that we have a certain amount of manure. We're trying to utilize it a little better or reduce the environmental risk from it. And so farmers recognize it. They know what they need to do. And I guess we're trying to get the buy-in from some of those who may not completely get it. And so it is an education process. I think H2O Ohio in general, we are learning more about it as we get a couple years into it, and we're shifting and making adjustments for it so we can do a little better educating and we can work with those producers a little more. When we look at the other nutrients out there, we have biosolids. So municipalities, they're allowed to put biosolids out on fields that is regulated by EPA. EPA tells them how much they can apply to the field. We do have a certain amount of compost that goes out. It's a very small percentage, but a large majority of what goes out there in this basin is fertilizer. And so that is fertilizer that is being imported here to the basin. And so you're looking at probably 70% of the nutrients that are applied as fertilizer. In general, we have been importing less and less fertilizer into the Western Lake Erie Basin. And so we have seen a decline in tonnage. I have a slide that OSU had put together next, and it's been a constant downward trend. Meanwhile, our yields are going up at the same time, so we're taking more away. So that bale of straw or that bale of hay or that bushel of corn, we're taking nutrients away and we're exporting it. Some goes to feed, that stays in here, and it just keeps getting recycled. Some is going 2 or 3 states away. And so it's a fine balance of how much nutrients we bring in, how much we have, and how much gets exported on a year-to-year basis through corn, wheat, soybeans, and all of those. You know, we are blessed with a great port here in Toledo. They take a lot of grain out through this. We have great companies here, you know, Cargill's, Anderson's, ADM, and they take a lot of the crops we make and take it elsewhere in the world. I mean, it really is the world at that point. So all that information I just went over is part of the draft TMDL. They just finished some public comment here but it really is a great source of information on breaking down those categories of how those nutrients are applied, where they're coming from. And it's been a great resource for us, and the folks over at EPA have been great to work with on trying to address this. We know there's a nutrient loading issue here. We're just trying to work with farmers to better educate them. How can we do better?
And really, that's the goal with education. They're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean,
Without the education component. So there's very too much to them for not using fertilizer.
So the final question was, is there any payment for not using fertilizer? And so the short answer is yes. If they decide they are not going to use and apply any fertilizer, we will make a payment for implementing that nutrient management. They receive $10 an acre for implementing that plan. And so they can apply up to whatever their nutrient management plan says, but they also can say, you know what, I'm going to keep $1 in my pocket and I'm not going to apply that. So yes, they still get the $10 for implementing it. When you look at cost share programs, a lot of times they're kind of backwards. You know, we tell you have to follow the plan, and so we've turned it around and said, okay, this is a phosphorus reduction plan or program, and we're trying to reduce phosphorus, but currently how we have it is you have to make a phosphorus application. So in the new version of H2O Ohio, we will be able to make payments and $10 an acre to not apply fertilizer. And so it's an education process. And we have differing rates. I mean, we've started out at $2 and people say, well, it's not worth jumping through the hoop. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. So it is a large education process, and we did not recognize that. This is a very large program, and we probably didn't recognize the educational value and the amount of education it was going to take to 1,600 producers, and now we're up to over 2,400 producers. But that's where those stormwater, those local folks that they can trust, that's where they come in. That local face that and you've known for 20 years, they have more influence with some of those farmers than we do. Yeah, I like working directly with the farmer. I enjoyed that part of this job, but really that local face is really important in that education process. So I guess I kind of alluded to it, but that legacy phosphorus management, my boss has always described this as your checking account. You put phosphorus into the system and you take it out through grain or through hay or one of those. And so for a long time, farmers were told, you have to build that bank when times are good. And so that's what farmers did. They had extra money at the end of the year, they buy some fertilizer and put it out there. In Soil Science 101, they're going to say phosphorus doesn't move and it'll stay in the piggy bank until you take it off as grain. The more and more we've learned about this issue, the more we know that's probably not the case, and we're losing a couple pounds every year, no matter what. So, as science and research and our folks in at the universities talk, we're losing a larger percent than what we thought, and we're learning more about this. And so this is data from OSU, and they looked at how much fertilizer has been bought annually. Our folks at Plant Health, that division at ODA, everyone pays a certain amount of tax based on the tonnage of fertilizer they buy. So we have really good records of how much fertilizer comes into the basin or anywhere throughout Ohio, really. But this was specifically the Western Lake Erie Basin. And so, we have been importing less and less fertilizer. Meanwhile, more yield in corn, soybeans, and wheat. And so,
So you're saying you're importing less quantity of fertilizer. Is that because more is being produced here by the manure?
So the question was, are we offsetting manure, or is the amount of manure created here becoming more and the amount of import is less?
Is that the reason for the less import?
So if we look across since the 1950s, we had a steady decline from the 1950s of livestock animal agriculture. And so in comparison to the 1950s, we're just about back to where we were for livestock numbers from like the 1950s. So yes, we have seen an incline, but we've also seen a decline in the amount of farms out there that have, as we've become less diverse, everyone used to have, I'm saying everyone in generalization, but, all those little family farms had 10 beef cattle. And, we had a certain amount that was out there. That number has declined, up through consolidation, and overall, we're just about where we were in the 1950s. And so, yes, there was a decline, but it's steady. It has went back up, but it is animal numbers and the amount of manure is about the same as it was in the 1950s.
So the reason then to buy less fertilizer, which is what you mean when you say import, farmers and farmers is because farming has gotten more efficient in crop production, or what?
So the question was, are is farming becoming more efficient, so they're buying less fertilizer? That's one. The other is, it's legacy phosphorus. You know, we put a lot in the bank. And now it's time to cash some of those checks out. And so we have some farmers who are purchasing very little commercial fertilizer.
It's in the soil.
Correct. And it's in the soil. There is a certain amount. And so that's why we do soil testing. We write a nutrient management plan to determine how much they may need to purchase.
And did they over fertilize at some point? Not
So the question is, did they fertilize it? Yes.
over fertilize.
Over fertilized, yes. And I mean, because of that school of thought is I want to maintain that bank. So I'm going to be farming for 40 years. And sometimes it might not be good. And I might not have an extra dollar to buy fertilizer. So I'm going to put it in the bank. And that is how soil chemistry and agronomics, you know, have been taught through the years is phosphorus doesn't move. Well, we lose a certain amount of it no matter what we do. And so it comes out of the tile or through the drainage ditch. And it ends up in the lake. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That people are now realizing they don't have to spend that money on fertilizer.
Yeah, so the comment was that they are seeing a decline because they are recognizing, and that education process is taking time, and they're saying, okay, I don't need to buy it, or maybe it is more efficient. I mean, the amount of seed genetics and the potential for corn, you know, a corn seed can grow 500 bushels if we have perfect rain, if we have perfect sun, and we don't have any limitations. We can grow 500 bushel corn. In Northwest Ohio, we grow 180 to 200 bushel corn. Typically, a good year, we may grow 300 bushel corn. And so the amount of nutrients that 300 bushel takes out versus 180, you know, we need to replace some of those nutrients. And so it is a very complex interaction when we're looking at nutrients in the soil and what's available to that crop. And so, yeah, our proportion of fertilizer has become less, and that manure has, you know, we can argue whether it's 20% or 25%, you know, it is a portion, and we have to apply that annually. And so what H2O Ohio is trying to do is say, let's put it on the acres that need it. And so let's take that 20% and put it out there where it can be utilized there on the farm. And so the one thing with legacy phosphorus, so if we define legacy phosphorus that is in the soil, and it may have been put there 40 years ago, it could have been put there 5 years ago. And so the data there on the left, that is how long it takes for that phosphorus soil test to come down. And so they're pretty flat lines if you look at those. You know, it takes 16 years to bring some of those soil test levels down. And so we run some basic rule of thumbs on how much corn and bushels of corn it takes to bring that soil test down. This isn't going to be a flip of the switch. It's going to take long-term decades to bring some of these soil test levels down. And so it is an education process, and we have been working on it. When I started in 2014, we had 2 or 3 different programs looking at soil testing. And so it's been an education process, and we've got a lot of buy-in from those producers. And I think H2O Ohio has really shown that, you know, farmers are behind this, and we're going to put in a nutrient management plan to show everyone else we are doing the things out there. They don't want to be the one that saying they're the bad guy. They're trying to do the thing. And I think by getting 2,400 producers to participate shows that they are interested in helping us. And so we recognize this legacy phosphorus management issues, it's going to be long-term. And so we hope that H2O Ohio sticks around for some time so we can continue to work on this nutrient loading issue. I mean, so.
You said that the number of cattle in the watershed is at about the 1950s level. Does that account for all the CAFOs in the watershed?
So So basically what I'm saying is the amount of animals and the nutrients has went down and then it went back up. So they're taking the same amount of animals that we had in the watershed. They're just putting it on one farm.
Like my dad used to have 10 cows, you know, one sheep and a bunch of chickens. This farm is gone. There's no farm there. There's no farm next door. There's no farm there. All those small batches of animals are gone.
Right. I mean, their farmers are less diversified than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so a lot of them have focused on one industry. So, you know, we've taken 10 dairy farms that had 100 head, and now it's 2 dairy farms. And so those animals have been replaced or moved. But roughly the same amount of manure is getting applied annually out there.
Because I've heard advocates
Mhm.
or against CAFOs say that we have millions of animals in the watershed.
Yes,
All of that manure needs to go somewhere and eventually, you know, overruns the golden.
yeah, so one facility, all CAFOs, and this is getting into divisional livestock environmental permitting. Yeah. So the question was, rephrase that again.
That people who are concerned about the phosphorus in the lake connected to excessive manure
Mhm.
in the watershed because of excessive animals from the concentrated animal feeding operations.
So the concern is that there are more CAFOs, and that's leading to excessive manure in specific areas. And so, yes, we do see balances very specifically located, but all of those CAFOs are required to have a manure management plan through the Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting. And so they do the nutrient management plan for those acres. And so if their nutrients exceed what they have acres for or their allotment, then they may look to other farms or truck it down the road or truck it further away to put those nutrients out where they can be utilized. And so that's where we come in now with H2O Ohio to even say, okay, we recognize you may have been taking it 3 miles away, but we have taken it 6 miles away, and expanding that footprint of that farm and offering cost share dollars to people who may not have used manure. And so now we have cost share dollars so they can work with their neighbors and say, let's expand the footprint of that individual farm and spread those nutrients out greater. Like I said, we're still only meeting 20 to 25% of our phosphorus need in the Western Basin. So we're not to the point. Grand Lake St. Mary's, they're probably, if I had to guess, I don't know anything specific, but they're probably 70, 80, maybe 90% of the nutrient need in that basin is met through manure. That's how many animals they have down there in a very small 50,000 acre watershed. And they have a lot of manure in that watershed. So they meet a much higher need. We're still only at that 20 to 25%. So we're still bringing in 2 to 3 times of phosphorus through fertilizer to meet the need here within the Western Lake Erie Basin. So manure is an issue. We're not going to deny it. We're not going to try to say it isn't, because we recognize it. And so we have to manage it appropriately.
Do neighboring states have programs like this one?
So the question is, do neighboring states have programs like this?
And specifically Michigan that also feeds Western.
Yeah, so when we're looking at the Western Lake Erie Basin, so the Western Lake Erie Basin covers about 800,000 acres. I don't know if that's cropland or total acres in Indiana. I think it's like 1.4 in Michigan. Michigan recently just started a new program. I think it's called Strand, and they're looking at doing some of the very similar practices to H2O Ohio to try to manage nutrients better. I think the S&T is about soil in Strand. I think S&T is soil testing. And so we have been working with them. We work very closely. Every year the state, all three states have to do a domestic action plan. It says for every 2 years, what is your state doing to address the nutrient concerns? And so that document gets updated every 2 years, and all those states have their different programs. But this was a very large investment. I don't know if it was the governor's budget or the legislature, but I think they put $25 million towards this program. I think that was annually. So a significant investment in programs that they had not seen before. And so we've been in contact, and they've been very interested in what we've done with H2O Ohio to see if they can learn anything before they make the same mistakes we did when building the program.
You mentioned, the three states,
Mhm.
do the domestic action plan. Which states are in?
So the three states that do the domestic action plan are Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio.
Why not Pennsylvania? Why aren't they involved?
So the reduction goals are specifically to the Western Basin. If we look at that specific, it's called Annex 4 reduction goals. There is also a similar reduction for the Central Basin, but for the Western Basin, it is specific. That 40% reduction is specific to the Western Lake Erie Basin. So we don't go in. They're not responsible for a domestic action plan. Other states also have similar domestic action plans, whether we're talking about Lake Michigan or any of those, because we have Wisconsin has nutrient loading issues. The Fox River there, very similar. They've implemented some of the same stuff we're doing. No winter spreading, some of those things. So
That doesn't have out of Canada really into the lake, and what do we do? Or if the United States goes as to what's happening up there.
So the question,
Coming in the lake.
so the question was, what is Canada doing? So Canada also has their own plan. And so Annex 4 is, since Lake Erie is both international, they have a similar process that they are doing. They have plans in place. I don't know financially if they're offering any, but they do have different programs. I attended a meeting, I think in 2017. They're just across the bridge there in Detroit, and they are doing their own things. They have a little different program with how they handle livestock up there, with quotas and different things, but it's a little different than how we handle them.
Because I think if Canada isn't doing the things they're supposed to do, like even going over to Lake Ontario and through the, Niagara River and out to the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the effect of all the Great Lakes is their combined efforts from all the different states towards their lakes.
They are still looking at that 40% reduction, the same as we are. And so they put together a reduction plan just like we do. And then it's the Ontario ministry up there do a very similar process as we do here. So we're all responsible for that same 40% reduction by 2025.
Let me ask you this, we have a lot of atomic plants along the way, I used to live in Buffalo, there's the atomic plant in Buffalo, we have one here, and there's probably others I'm not aware of. What effect does all that stuff have on the lakes and through terms of water? See, I have a place in Florida, and it's a problem down there.
The question was about nuclear power, and I'm not comfortable discussing that. I know that they use water and it warms the water up. That's about the extent of my knowledge with the nuclear power.
I just wonder the effect it has, what's happening with us when we're drinking water with some of the stuff that comes out of those.
I was not prepared for that question. So.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and on that note, we'll have to end this presentation, but it was really informative. Thank you
Very much. We have some materials for you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I can keep going if you want me to. Perfect. So That was the last one.
Go over how many CAFOs get approved or how, I heard that 100 are coming to the Maumee River Basin. Maumee.
So the folks at the Division of Livestock Environmental Permitting, there is a process. I'm unfamiliar with that exact process, as that's their division.
But there is a process.
There is a process, and so they say, okay, do you have enough acres to spread on? How many animals are you putting in? Let's see your nutrient management plan. And so there is a process there for permitting. They do get denied. I mean,
They do get,
yeah, there are certain situations where they either didn't do the paperwork right, or they didn't have enough acres, or those, I mean, so they do get denied.
okay. So, we won't, we're done. I'm done. Oh, I muted. Okay, so now I got it.
Muted. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, sorry, everyone. It's the typical problem I have at Zoom all the time. Thank you, Kip, for very informative and interesting talk. Got a lot of questions, and I'm sure we're going to have another angle about this whole issue next time when we talk to Sandy Bin. So we want to thank you. We have a little gift for you that we'll want to give you and some information about us. So should I just go up and give you? Okay.